Welcome, dear listeners, to a journey through the icy winds of Bavarian winter of 1788. Today we will immerse ourselves in the snow-covered streets of Munich, where destiny intertwined two hearts amid fire and ashes of a world about to collapse. This is the story of Gretchen von Regensburg, daughter of merchants who dared to dream beyond their station, and Prince Maximilian, heir to a throne balanced between millennial traditions and the revolutionary winds blowing from France. Between the flames of a devastating fire and the political games of a declining court, we will discover how true love can flourish even when everything seems to conspire against it. A story of overcoming, dignity, and hope in times of uncertainty. Where are you joining us from right now? Leave your city in the comments. I'd love to know from what corner of the world you're listening to this story. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like if you appreciate narratives that touch the heart. Your participation makes all the difference, so we can continue bringing these exciting stories to you. Munich, Kingdom of Bavaria. Winter of 1788. Dawn arrived silently over Munich that December morning, as if nature itself sensed that the day would bring irreversible changes. Snow fell in heavy flakes, covering the city's Gothic towers with a mantle of purity that would soon be stained by the ashes of destiny. Gretchen von Regensburg adjusted her wool cloak over her shoulders as she walked through the narrow streets toward the convent of St. Ursula. At 20, she possessed that discreet beauty that flourished in women of strong character. Hazel eyes that reflected sharp intelligence and lips that knew how to keep secrets. Daughter of Heinrich von Regensburg, a textile merchant who had bought his title with honestly earned gold, she navigated between two worlds, the bourgeois of her origin and the aristocratic of her aspirations. The aroma of cinnamon and warm bread emanated from the bakeries, mixing with the metallic smell of snow and smoke from chimneys. Gretchen inhaled deeply, feeling the burn of frozen air in her lungs. The Dowager Duchess Elizabeth had requested her presence to organize charity baskets, a task she embraced not out of social obligation, but from genuine compassion for the less fortunate. The streets began to pulse with morning life when the first cry resonated through the market square. "Fire! Fire in the central market!" The clamor spread like the flames themselves, and Gretchen felt her heart accelerate. Forgetting protocols and the meeting at the convent, she lifted her skirts and ran toward the tumult. Smoke was already beginning to tinge the sky gray, creating a sinister contrast with the whiteness of the snow. Meanwhile, in the royal quarters of Munich Palace, Crown Prince Maximilian von Wittelsbach contemplated through his study window the same snow that covered the city. At 24, he possessed the natural elegance of Bavarian nobility, but his blue eyes revealed an unrest that went beyond his age. The news arriving from France was increasingly disturbing, and rumors of popular discontent reached the golden halls of the palace. When the sound of alarm bells broke the morning silence, Maximilian did not hesitate. Contrary to protocol that demanded he wait for official reports, he went down to the streets wearing only a cloak over his white shirt, determined to see with his own eyes the extent of the catastrophe. The central market was Munich's commercial heart, where merchants from all over Bavaria negotiated grains, textiles, and spices. Now flames danced between the wooden stalls like hungry demons, devouring not only merchandise, but the dreams and livelihoods of dozens of families. Gretchen arrived at the square's outskirts just as the roof of the largest grain stall collapsed in a cascade of golden sparks. The heat was intense even at a distance, causing snow to melt instantly upon touching the heated ground. Men ran back and forth with water buckets, but their efforts seemed insignificant before the fury of the fire. It was then that she heard it, a fragile cry, almost imperceptible amid the chaos. Her eyes scanned the crowd until they located the source of the sound. A girl no more than 7 years old, kneeling beside what remained of a wooden toy stall, calling to someone who did not respond. Without thinking of consequences, Gretchen plunged into the smoke. The world became a nebulous labyrinth, where each breath burned her throat and tears flowed constantly. Guided by the girl's crying, she managed to reach her. She was trapped under a beam that had fallen from a neighboring construction. "Don't move," Gretchen murmured, her voice hoarse from smoke. "I'll get you out of here." But the beam was too heavy for her delicate arms. Panic began to set in when she realized that a new section of the roof threatened to collapse over them. It was in that moment of desperation that two strong hands emerged through the smoke. grabbing the other end of the beam. Maximilian had followed the same crying that had guided Gretchen. When their eyes met through the greyish mist, time seemed to suspend for an instant. There were no protocols there, no titles or hierarchies, only two people united by the urgent desire to save an innocent life. Together, they managed to lift the beam enough for the girl to be removed. Gretchen wrapped her in her own cloak, while Maximilian carried her in his arms. The three escaping moments before the entire structure collapsed in an explosion of sparks and smoke. Breathless and covered in ashes, they found themselves in a small alley adjacent to the square, where the air was more breathable. The girl, frightened but unharmed, clung to Gretchen's dress as if it were her salvation. "Is she hurt?" asked Maximilian, his voice loaded with genuine concern as he examined Gretchen. She shook her head, unable to speak for a moment. There was something in the intensity of those blue eyes that left her speechless, a vulnerability that contrasted with the haughty posture she would expect from a prince. "And you?" she finally managed to ask. A smile touched his lips, not the educated smile of court, but something authentic and warm. "We'll survive," he responded. And there was an unspoken promise in those words. The girl was soon claimed by a desperate woman who appeared running through the alley, her mother, who had lost her daughter in the confusion. Between tears of gratitude, she kissed the hands of both saviors before disappearing into the crowd. Gretchen and Maximilian remained alone in the alley, conscious for the first time of who stood before them. Recognition came gradually. She, the daughter of the textile merchant who frequented the court's charity functions. He, the heir to Bavaria's throne whose portrait adorned coins and official documents. But in that moment, covered in ashes and still breathing the acrid air of smoke, they were simply two souls who had shared something profound and transformative. "I shouldn't be here," Gretchen said finally, the reality of protocols weighing again on her shoulders. "Neither should you," he responded, but there was a defiant tone in his voice. "And yet here we are." The bell of a nearby church chimed 9 times, reminding them that the world beyond that alley continued to exist. Gretchen made a hesitant curtsy, but Maximilian gently held her gloved hand. "No," he said softly, "not today. Today we are just two people who saved a child." She raised her eyes to meet his, and for an infinite moment the future seemed full of possibilities that no protocol could dictate. How could it be possible that amid the flames consuming Munich's commercial heart, two other hearts would discover a completely different flame, one that promised to burn with much more intensity and duration? 3 days had passed since the fire, but smoke still seemed to permeate every fiber of the dress Gretchen had worn that morning. She had sent it to be washed twice, but something of the experience remained. Not only the aroma of ashes, but the memory of those strong hands that had held the beam beside her. The palace seethed with preparations for relief actions for affected families. Dowager Duchess Elizabeth, with her severe elegance and eyes that missed no details, had summoned the ladies of court to organize donations of food and clothing. Gretchen found herself in the palace library, cataloguing donated articles, when a shadow fell over the pages of her register. "Miss von Regensburg." The deep voice made her slowly raise her eyes. Maximilian stood before the table, no longer covered in ashes, but impeccably dressed in the blue uniform of the Royal Guard. However, there was something in his posture that suggested the same urgency of that smoke-filled morning. "Your Highness," she murmured, beginning to rise. "Please, continue your work," he said, approaching and examining the registers. "I see you're organizing donations by district, intelligent strategy." Gretchen felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Duchess Elizabeth suggested that my familiarity with commercial matters might be useful." "Your family knows the real needs of the people," he agreed, and there was genuine approval in his voice. "Something that we, raised among silk and velvet, sometimes forget to consider." The comment surprised her. Princes didn't usually acknowledge limitations in their education, much less praise bourgeois perspective. "Accompany me tomorrow," he said suddenly, "on visits to affected areas. Your presence would be valuable." The hesitation in his voice revealed there was more behind the invitation than practical matters. Gretchen felt her heart accelerate. "If Duchess Elizabeth approves—" "She already approved," he interrupted with a smile that made something dance in her chest. In fact, it was her idea. The next morning, a golden carriage waited for Gretchen at the entrance of her residence. The discreet luxury of the interior, embroidered velvet and small silver details, contrasted with the simplicity of her family life. Her father, Heinrich, had observed the preparations with a mixture of pride and concern. "Remember who you are, my daughter," he had murmured, adjusting the pearl brooch on her shawl. "And remember who you are not." The words resonated in her mind when the carriage stopped at the first house visited, a small cabin where a family of bakers had lost everything in the fire. Maximilian descended first, offering his hand to help her. The touch was brief, but she felt the firmness of his fingers through silk gloves. The family received them with a mixture of reverence and shyness. The woman, still young but with eyes aged by recent loss, held a baby in her arms while two children hid behind her skirts. "Majesty," she murmured, making an awkward curtsy. But it was Gretchen who approached first, kneeling to the children's height. "What are your names?" she asked gently, taking small wooden toys from her bag that she had brought. The simplicity of the gesture broke the ice. As the children approached timidly, Maximilian watched, fascinated by the naturalness with which Gretchen navigated between different social worlds. "My husband is looking for work," the woman said hesitantly. "But without an oven, without tools." "There's a vacancy in the royal bakeries," Maximilian said suddenly. "The work is hard, but the pay is fair and includes housing." The gratitude in the woman's eyes was instant and overwhelming. Gretchen felt something tighten in her chest, not just compassion, but admiration for the man beside her, who used his power to solve concrete problems. They visited 6 more families that morning. In each house the same pattern repeated. Maximilian offered practical solutions, while Gretchen provided the human comfort that allowed people to accept help without feeling diminished. On the last visit, as they left a small house where an elderly widow lived alone, it began to snow again. The flakes fell slowly, creating unexpected intimacy as they walked toward the carriage. "You have a gift," Maximilian said suddenly. "Pardon?" "People trust you immediately, not just because you come from similar origins, but because you genuinely care." Gretchen stopped walking. "And your Highness doesn't care?" "I care," he responded, turning to face her. "But I learned to care through numbers, reports, policies. You care through the heart." Snow continued falling, creating a veil of privacy around them. Maximilian took a step closer. "May I confess something?" The knot in Gretchen's throat prevented her from responding, but she nodded. "I can't stop thinking about that morning. Not just about the child we saved, but about the moment our eyes met through the smoke." The words floated between them like snowflakes, delicate, fragile, but impossible to ignore. "Your Highness," she began, but was interrupted by the sound of approaching horse hooves. A detachment of royal guards appeared on the street, led by a man of severe appearance whom Gretchen recognized as Count Friedrich von Wittelsbach, distant cousin of the royal family and one of the most influential figures at court. "Highness," Friedrich said, dismounting with precise movements, "your mother requests your immediate return. Urgent news has arrived from Vienna." The moment of intimacy evaporated instantly. Maximilian recovered his formal posture, but his eyes remained fixed on Gretchen for a second longer than would be appropriate. "Naturally, Miss von Regensburg, I thank you for your assistance today." The formalism of the words contrasted painfully with the intimacy they had shared moments before. Gretchen made a perfect curtsy, but when she raised her eyes she saw that Maximilian was discreetly removing his gloves. When he approached to help her into the carriage, his bare hands touched hers for an instant. The contact was electric, skin against skin, without the barriers of protocol. "Tomorrow," he murmured low enough that the guards couldn't hear. "The library. At noon." As the carriage moved away, taking her back to the safety of her bourgeois life, Gretchen pressed her hand against her racing heart. On the fogged window of the carriage, she unconsciously drew a small heart with her finger. She didn't yet know that Count Friedrich had observed every nuance of the interaction between her and the prince, nor that a letter was already being drafted to alert certain people about the need to closely monitor certain friendships that could become inconvenient. Would love manage to flourish under the weight of so many expectations, or would the first buds be crushed before even having the chance to grow? The palace library at noon was a sanctuary of silence and golden light. Sunbeams filtered through tall windows, creating dancing patterns over infinite rows of leather-bound books. Gretchen arrived a few minutes before the agreed time, feigning interest in a volume on botany while her heart hammered against her ribs. Maximilian appeared punctually, but he was not alone. A female figure accompanied him, young, elegant, with the impeccable posture that only the most refined European nobility could produce. Gretchen felt her stomach contract when she recognized the unmistakable Habsburg bearing. "Miss von Regensburg," Maximilian said, his voice carefully controlled, "allow me to present Her Royal Highness Franziska von Habsburg." The Austrian princess smiled, an educated and measured smile that didn't reach her eyes. At 17, Franziska possessed that classic beauty that court painters adored portraying: perfectly arranged blonde hair, porcelain skin, and blue eyes that seemed to evaluate and catalogue everything they saw. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Franziska said, and there was something in her voice, a sharp intelligence disguised as courtesy, that made Gretchen immediately realize this was not a naive adolescent. "I heard about your brave action during the fire." "Your Highness is very kind," Gretchen responded, making a perfect curtsy while internally calculating all the implications of Franziska's presence. "Franziska arrived yesterday from Vienna," Maximilian explained, but there was a tension in his voice he couldn't completely disguise. "She's interested in our charity initiatives." "How admirable," Franziska murmured, leafing through a book on agriculture. "In Vienna we also have similar programs. Perhaps we can learn from each other." The wordplay was subtle but clear. Gretchen understood she was being gently dismissed from any illusions she might have cultivated. The three spent the next hour in educated conversation about social and political matters. Franziska proved surprisingly well-informed about events in France. The Estates General had been convened for May, and rumors of radical changes circulated throughout Europe. "Interesting times," she commented, observing Maximilian over her book. "Moments when alliances become more important than ever." The message wasn't subtle. Gretchen felt increasingly like an intruder in a conversation whose true meanings escaped her. When they finally said goodbye, Maximilian accompanied Gretchen to the library exit. In the empty corridor, he stopped abruptly. "Gretchen," he began, using her name for the first time, and the sound of it in his voice made something shatter in her chest. "No explanation is necessary, Your Highness," she interrupted softly. "I understand the situation perfectly." "You don't understand," he said vehemently, grabbing her arm. "Franziska arrived earlier than expected. There are political pressures." "Pressures that a merchant's daughter cannot understand?" she asked, and there was genuine pain in her voice. Maximilian closed his eyes for a moment. "Pressures I myself barely understand. Europe is changing, Gretchen. What happens in France can affect us all. Marriages like mine with Franziska aren't just personal unions. They're diplomatic treaties. And I'm an unnecessary complication." "You are," he hesitated, struggling with words he couldn't pronounce. "You are the first real person I've encountered in years. But that may not be enough." That night in the von Regensburg family property, Gretchen contemplated the snow-covered garden through her room window. The house, with its solid, dark wood furniture and Persian rugs that testified to family prosperity, suddenly seemed small and restrictive. A soft knock on the door interrupted her melancholy thoughts. "Come in," she said, expecting to see her mother or one of the maids. Instead, an elegant and familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Dowager Duchess Elizabeth von Wittelsbach, Maximilian's mother, rarely made informal visits. Her presence in the bourgeois house of the von Regensburgs was as surprising as a comet appearing in the night sky. "Your Excellency," Gretchen stammered, jumping from her chair and making a deep curtsy. "Sit, child," Elizabeth said, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk." The Duchess was a formidable woman. At 52, she maintained the beauty that had made her famous in her youth, but her dark eyes revealed a sharp political intelligence that had navigated decades of court intrigues. "You are intelligent," Elizabeth said without preamble, settling in the armchair facing Gretchen. "Intelligent enough to understand that certain affections can be dangerous in times like these." Gretchen felt blood drain from her face. "I don't know what Your Excellency is talking about." "Of course you do," Elizabeth smiled, but there was steel in her expression. "My son inherited many qualities from me, including the inability to completely hide his feelings. And you, my dear, possess that transparency that the young confuse with discretion." Silence stretched between them like a rope about to break. "Princess Franziska," Elizabeth continued, arrived with very specific proposals from Vienna. Proposals that could significantly strengthen our position in an increasingly unstable Europe. I understand, Gretchen murmured. Do you understand? I doubt it. Elizabeth leaned forward. Your family achieved social elevation through honest work and commercial intelligence. I admire that, but purchased titles are still viewed with suspicion by the old nobility. In normal times that would be irrelevant, but these are not normal times. Gretchen raised her eyes. What is your excellency suggesting? That it would be prudent for an intelligent young woman like you to consider broadening your horizons. There's a property in the countryside belonging to my sister Dorothea. She seeks cultivated company, someone to help with correspondence and property management. The proposal floated in the air like a sharp blade. It was exile disguised as opportunity. And if I refuse? Elizabeth smiled, but there was coldness in the gesture. You are free to make your own choices, my dear, but choices have consequences, for all involved. After the Duchess's departure, Gretchen remained alone in her room, contemplating the night landscape. Snow continued falling, covering the world in white silence that seemed to muffle all possibilities. 3 hours later, an almost imperceptible knock on the window made her jump. Opening the curtains, she found Maximilian standing in the garden, wrapped in a dark cloak, hair dusted with snow. Without thinking of consequences, she opened the window. Have you gone mad? She whispered, but was already helping him enter. Probably, he admitted, shaking snow from his cloak. My mother came here tonight. Yes? And made an offer you can't refuse. Gretchen nodded silently. Maximilian approached her, his hands finding her face. If I were just a common man. But you're not, she interrupted softly, and I'm not a princess. In the winter garden, he said suddenly. Tomorrow at midnight. Before you make any decision, give me one last night. The request floated between them, loaded with promises and farewells. When Gretchen nodded, something broke and recomposed simultaneously in her heart. Would this last encounter be a celebration of the love they discovered, or the funeral of possibilities they could never explore? The palace's winter garden was a miracle of glass and wrought iron, where exotic plants from throughout the empire flourished even under December snow. At 11:30 at night, only a few strategically positioned candles illuminated the space, creating dancing shadows among the tropical foliage. Gretchen arrived first, wrapped in a dark blue cloak that had belonged to her grandmother. The aroma of jasmine and preserved roses mixed with humid, heated air, creating an almost unreal atmosphere, as if they had entered an enchanted greenhouse where time didn't exist. When Maximilian appeared, emerging from the shadows like a figure from a dream, she felt her heart race. He wore no uniform or royal insignia, just a simple white shirt and dark trousers, like any common man coming to meet his beloved woman. I thought you wouldn't come, he murmured, approaching slowly. I thought the same about you, she responded, watching how candlelight played on his face. They stood for a moment, 2 meters of distance between them, conscious that each word, each gesture might be the last they would share in intimacy. My mother said you received an offer, Maximilian said finally. Your mother is very persuasive. And are you going to accept? Gretchen moved among the plants, her fingers distractedly caressing the petals of a purple orchid. What choice do I have? Stay here and watch you marry Princess Franziska? Become the subject of malicious gossip? Maximilian followed her, maintaining respectful distance, but gradually diminishing it. What if I refused the marriage? Would you do that? The question came out sharper than she intended. I don't know, he admitted with brutal honesty. Europe is on fire, Gretchen. What happens in France could spread. Alliances could be the difference between stability and chaos, and I would represent chaos. You represent... He stopped behind her, his breath warming her nape. You represent the only real thing I've found in a lifetime of obligations. Gretchen turned slowly, finding herself face to face with him. The proximity was overwhelming. She could see every line of his face, every shade of blue in his eyes. Reality is a luxury princes cannot afford, she said softly. Maybe it's time to redefine what it means to be a prince. Before she could respond, his lips found hers. The kiss was tender at first, hesitant, as if both were testing the reality of the moment. Then it deepened, charged with all the passion and desperation they had kept for weeks. When they separated, both trembled, not from cold, but from the intensity of the connection pulsing between them. "Gretchen," he murmured against her lips. "Don't say anything," she whispered. "Just stay with me tonight." Just tonight. They moved through the greenhouse like dancers in a silent waltz, stopping to touch a flower here, to admire the moon's reflection through the glass there. It was as if they were trying to engrave every detail in memory. "When I was a child," Maximilian said, sitting on a small wrought-iron bench and drawing her to sit beside him, "I used to escape here when protocol classes became unbearable. It was the only place where I could simply exist. And now? Now it's the place where I discovered that existing without you is going to be impossible." The words floated between them, like the moisture drops condensing on the glass walls. Gretchen leaned her head against his shoulder, inhaling his scent, sandalwood and something indefinably masculine that made her feel at home. "Tell me about your aunt's property," she said finally. "It's a peaceful place. Dorothea is different. Widow of a colonel, never had children. Reads a lot, corresponds with intellectuals from all over Europe. You would like her. Does she know why you're sending me there?" Maximilian hesitated. Dorothea understands the complexities of family politics, but she also understands the human heart. They remained silent for a long moment, watching snow fall on the other side of the glass walls. It was hypnotic. The world out there seemed infinitely distant. "There's something I need to tell you," Gretchen said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "What?" She raised her eyes to meet his. It's been 2 weeks since I—" Understanding gradually came to Maximilian's face. His eyes widened, then filled with a mixture of terror and joy that left her breathless. "Are you sure? I can't have absolute certainty without more time, but—" She put her hand over her belly. "My body has changed. And you were the only—" Maximilian slid from the bench, kneeling before her. His hands covered hers over her belly, and for a moment the entire world reduced to that gesture. "A child," he murmured, marveled. "This changes everything," she said. "Do you understand? I can't simply disappear discreetly, not anymore." "No," he agreed, his voice gaining a determination she had never heard before. "This doesn't change everything. This changes who I need to be." Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed from outside the greenhouse. Voices approached, guards making their night rounds. "You have to go," Gretchen whispered, pushing him toward the side exit. "Find a way to send me news," he said urgently. "Through Dorothea, through someone trustworthy. No matter what happens in the coming days or weeks, remember, this doesn't end here." He kissed her once more, quickly, then disappeared into the night like a shadow. Gretchen remained alone among the exotic plants, one hand still pressed against the belly where new life might be growing. Outside, snow continued falling, covering the world in white, the color of new possibilities, but also of surrender. When she finally left the greenhouse, she didn't know that a figure had observed the entire scene from an upper window. Count Friedrich von Wittelsbach lowered the curtain with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, already planning how to use that information to shape the dynasty's future. Would love be strong enough to survive the political storms approaching, or would this be the last night of dreams before cruel reality separated them forever? The next morning arrived loaded with dark omens. Gretchen awoke with nausea that confirmed her suspicions about pregnancy, but also with a strange feeling that something fundamental had changed in the world during the night. She was right. At breakfast time, her father Heinrich appeared in the living room with the gravest face she had ever seen. In his hands trembled a letter sealed with royal arms. "What is this?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "A summons," Heinrich said, his voice hoarse. "You must present yourself at the palace within an hour, not for charity work." He paused significantly. "For a private audience with Her Excellency Duchess Elizabeth and the Privy Council." The Privy Council. Gretchen felt blood drain from her face. This was the highest instance of the Bavarian court, convened only for state matters of extreme gravity. "Father—" "Don't tell me," Heinrich interrupted, raising his hand. "Whatever has happened, don't tell me. I need plausible denial to protect our family." An hour later, Gretchen found herself in the most formal of the palace halls, facing a semicircular table where 5 of Bavaria's most powerful figures observed her with expressions ranging from disapproval to cold curiosity. Duchess Elizabeth occupied the center, flanked by Count Friedrich von Wittelsbach and 3 other councillors whom Gretchen recognized only by sight. Conspicuously absent was Maximilian. "Miss von Regensburg," Elizabeth began, her voice cutting like crystal, "certain irregularities in your recent behavior have been brought to our attention." Gretchen maintained an upright posture, hands clasped in front of her to hide the trembling. "I don't understand, Your Excellency." "Don't you?" Friedrich leaned forward, an unpleasant smile playing on his lips. "Perhaps this will refresh your memory." He slid an object across the table. Gretchen felt the world spin when she recognized the small pearl brooch she had lost in the winter garden the night before. "Found during morning cleaning of the greenhouse," Friedrich continued, "along with evidence that the location was used for a nocturnal encounter." The silence that followed was deafening. Gretchen forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting against the panic that threatened to dominate her. "More concerning still," Elizabeth said coldly, "are reports from our observers about your growing intimacy with certain persons of the royal family." "Observers?" The word escaped Gretchen's lips before she could contain it. "Did you really think that the movements of a crown prince would go unnoticed?" Friedrich asked with disdain. "Every conversation, every glance, every touch, everything was noted and reported." One of the other councillors, an elderly man with a white beard, cleared his throat. "There's also the matter of your current physical state." Gretchen felt as if an icy blade had pierced her heart. "My physical state? Your personal maid," Elizabeth explained with clinical coldness, "was questioned about certain changes in your habits. Morning nausea, altered appetite, growing, intimate needs." The betrayal cut deep. Gretchen tried to remember which of the maids might have sold her privacy for coins or political favor. "Deny it," Friedrich said softly. "Deny everything, and perhaps we can find a discreet solution to this embarrassing situation." "And if I don't deny," Friedrich's smile widened, "then you'll face the complete consequences of your actions. Your family will lose their title, their properties will be confiscated, and you'll be banished not only from Bavaria, but from all allied territories." Gretchen closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was fierce determination in her gaze. "I will not deny the truth." A murmur ran through the table. Elizabeth leaned forward, her eyes shining with something that might have been reluctant admiration. "Very well. Then you confirm that you maintained intimate relations with my son?" "I confirm that I love Prince Maximilian, and that he loves me." "Love," Friedrich repeated with contempt, a pretty word to cover lust and ambition. "Ambition?" Gretchen rose from her chair, her natural dignity overcoming fear. "What ambition could a merchant's daughter have in loving a prince, knowing it can only bring ruin?" "The ambition to rise above your station," Friedrich responded. "To use your condition to force a marriage that would be unacceptable under normal circumstances." "My condition," Gretchen repeated slowly, one hand moving instinctively to her belly, "was not planned. It was a consequence of genuine love, not calculation." Another murmur ran through the hall. Elizabeth raised her hand for silence. "That changes circumstances," she admitted. "A bastard child of royal blood cannot simply be ignored." "Then what do you propose?" Gretchen asked. "A solution that protects the dignity of all parties involved," Elizabeth said. "You will be discreetly transferred to a safe place, where you'll receive the best medical care. After birth, the child will be raised as a ward of the court, with appropriate education and position, but without public recognition of paternity. And me. You will receive a generous pension and be free to rebuild your life far from here. Perhaps in one of the American colonies, where a new identity can be arranged." The proposal floated in the air like a death sentence disguised as mercy. Gretchen understood they were offering her a golden cage in exchange for her freedom and her child. "And if I refuse?" "Then," Friedrich said with evident satisfaction, "you and your child will face life as dishonored plebeians, without protection, without resources, in a Europe that becomes more dangerous each day." At that moment, the hall doors opened abruptly. Maximilian entered with determined steps, still wearing travel clothes as if he had ridden all night. "Forgive the interruption," he said, but his voice carried a royal authority that made everyone straighten. "But I believe this discussion concerns me directly." "Maximilian," Elizabeth began, "this is not the time." "This is exactly the time, Mother," he interrupted, positioning himself beside Gretchen. "If you're going to decide the fate of the woman I love and our child, then I have the right to participate in that decision." The silence that followed was charged with shock and tension. Friedrich was the first to recover. "Highness, certainly you understand this is a delicate matter that requires courage to do what is right," Maximilian interrupted. "And what is right is simple. I will marry Gretchen von Regensburg." The declaration fell over the hall like lightning. Elizabeth paled, Friedrich turned purple with indignation, and the other councillors began murmuring among themselves. "That is impossible," Elizabeth said finally. "Princess Franziska will understand," Maximilian said firmly. "And if she doesn't understand, then she wasn't the ally we thought she was." Gretchen looked at the man beside her, the prince who was risking everything for her, and felt something open in her chest like a flower blooming in sunlight. But would love be enough to face the political storm that was about to descend upon them, or would this brave declaration be only the first step toward an even greater tragedy? The Ettel convent rose against the Bavarian mountains, like a fortress of devotion and silence. Its grey stone walls absorbed winter light from December, creating an atmosphere of sacred isolation that seemed to exist outside mundane time. Gretchen had arrived there 3 days after the tumultuous audience at the palace, escorted by silent guards and a sealed letter addressed to the Mother Superior. The decision had been made in the tense hours following Maximilian's defiant declaration, a temporary solution that partially satisfied all parties while a more permanent resolution was sought. Her cell was small but clean, a narrow bed, a simple table, a wooden chair, and a small window offering a view of the inner courtyard where sisters cultivated medicinal herbs even in winter. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by bells marking canonical hours and the occasional whisper of habits in stone corridors. "You mustn't be saddened," said Sister Maria, the young novice assigned to care for Gretchen. At 22, Maria possessed a serenity that contrasted with her young age and kind eyes that seemed to understand sufferings she was too young to have experienced. Suffering, when accepted with patience, can transform into grace. Gretchen adjusted the wool shawl over her shoulders. December cold penetrated the ancient walls, and she constantly felt a chill that seemed to come more from her soul than her body. "Sister Maria," she said hesitantly, "may I ask you a personal question?" The novice smiled while organizing dried herbs on a small shelf. "Of course, Sister Gretchen. Why did you choose this life?" Maria stopped her work, her hands floating over a jar of chamomile. "Love," she said simply. "Love for God? Love for a man who couldn't love me back." Maria turned to face Gretchen. "He was married, father of a family. I was young and foolish, believing passion could overcome any obstacle. When I understood I was only causing pain to everyone involved, I sought refuge here." The raw honesty of the confession surprised Gretchen. "And did you find peace?" "I found purpose," Maria corrected. "Peace is still under construction." That night, alone in her cell, Gretchen began a letter she knew she couldn't send. "My dear unborn child, I write these words in a convent cell, while snow falls silently outside the window. I don't know what world you'll find when you decide to join us, but I hope it's a world where love is stronger than politics, where the human heart can choose its own destiny. Your father is a good man, braver than might be prudent. Today he faced the entire Bavarian court for us. I don't know if that will save us or condemn us, but I know you'll be born from true love. And that, my little one, is a rare gift in this world." The sisters here speak much about faith, about accepting divine will. I struggle to find that acceptance because my heart still cries out that we'll fight for our happiness. Perhaps that's what your generation will need to learn, when to fight and when to accept, when to defy and when to surrender. The letter continued for 3 pages, words pouring like tears onto the paper. When she finished, Gretchen folded it carefully and hid it between the pages of a prayer book. On the 4th day, Sister Maria appeared in her cell with an unusual expression, contained excitement mixed with concern. "There's a visitor," she announced quietly. "A father from Munich. He says he comes with important messages." Father Benedict was a man in his 50s, with grey hair and penetrating eyes that suggested sharp intelligence honed by years of confessional. Gretchen received him in the convent's visiting room. an austere space with crucifixes on the walls and 2 chairs separated by a simple table. "Miss von Regensburg," he said after initial formalities, "I bring news that may interest you." "From the palace?" "From Prince Maximilian." Benedict leaned forward, lowering his voice. "He sent me to inform you that certain negotiations are underway." Gretchen's heart accelerated. "What kind of negotiations?" "Complex ones," the father admitted. "Princess Franziska proved more understanding than expected. She herself suggested an exit that could preserve the honor of all parties." "What exit?" Benedict hesitated. "She proposed breaking the engagement publicly, claiming desire to dedicate more time to religious studies before any matrimonial commitment. That would allow her to return to Vienna with intact dignity." Gretchen felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by apprehension. "And regarding Maximilian and me?" "That is more complicated." The father intertwined his fingers. "There's a rural property belonging to Baroness Dorothea von Wittelsbach. She offered discreet hospitality, while a more permanent solution is negotiated." "Discreet hospitality," Gretchen repeated. "A more comfortable exile, you mean?" "Perhaps. Or perhaps an opportunity for tempers to cool and reason to prevail." That same night, Sister Maria brought a surprise. A second letter, this one officially sealed and addressed to the Mother Superior, but containing a separate message for Gretchen. It was from Elizabeth, the Dowager Duchess. "Dear Gretchen, the events of recent days have forced me to reconsider many things. My son demonstrated a determination I hadn't seen in him since childhood, and you demonstrated a dignity that would honor any lineage. Baroness Dorothea accepts receiving you at her property. There, far from court pressures, perhaps we can find a solution that honors both heart and reason. Depart tomorrow morning. A carriage will await you. Elizabeth." On the last night at the convent, Gretchen found herself again conversing with Sister Maria in the herb garden, where sleeping plants awaited spring's return under protective straw coverings. "Will you miss this?" Maria asked. "I'll miss the peace," Gretchen admitted. "And you. Your kindness was a balm in a very difficult time." "And you reminded me why it's worth fighting for love," Maria responded softly. "Even when it seems impossible." They remained silent for a moment, 2 young women whose destinies had been shaped by choices of the heart. "Sister Maria," Gretchen said finally, "if I were to write, would you respond?" "Always," the novice promised. "Prayers cross any distance." The next morning, as the carriage moved away from the convent toward Dorothea's property, Gretchen carried with her more than her few belongings. She carried renewed hope that true love, tested by the greatest adversities, might still find a way to flourish. But what obstacles still awaited at the rural property, and would Baroness Dorothea be an ally, or merely a gentler guardian of her golden prison? Dorothea von Wittelsbach's property proved to be a surprise from the first moment the carriage crossed the wrought-iron gates. Instead of the formal mansion Gretchen expected, she found a sandstone construction of modest proportions, embraced by gardens that even in winter revealed carefully cultivated beauty. Dorothea herself waited at the main entrance, and her appearance also defied expectations. At 43, the younger sister of Duchess Elizabeth possessed a more earthly and accessible beauty. Chestnut hair loose in a simple braid and practical clothes that suggested someone more interested in comfort than protocol. "Welcome, my dear," she said, enveloping Gretchen in a maternal embrace even before formal curtsies. "You must be exhausted from the journey. Come, let's warm you with tea and conversation." The house's interior confirmed the first impression of elegant informality. Books scattered across all available surfaces, indoor plants thrived in sunny corners, and a large stone fireplace dominated the main room, where cats warmed themselves lazily. "It wasn't always like this," Dorothea explained, serving tea in simple but refined porcelain. "When my husband Hans was alive, this was a more military house. Uniforms, rigid schedules, protocols. After his death, I decided to transform it into what I had always dreamed it would be, a place where mind and heart could breathe freely." Gretchen accepted the teacup, feeling for the first time in weeks that a bit of tension was leaving her shoulders. "You're very kind to receive me, Baroness." "Dorothea, please." "And it's not kindness, it's necessity." Dorothea settled in an armchair facing Gretchen, her eyes, as blue as Maximilian's, studying the young woman's face with genuine interest. There's very little space in this world for true love. When it appears, we must protect it like a rare endangered species. Duchess Elizabeth said you were different. Dorothea laughed, a rich musical sound that filled the room. Elizabeth uses different when she means inconvenient. Yes, I suppose I am different. I read French philosophers, maintain correspondence with intellectuals from all over Europe, and believe marriage should be based on mutual affection, not political convenience. Dangerous ideas in current times. All the best ideas are dangerous, Dorothea agreed. That's why they need protection. Gretchen spent the first days at the property recovering physically and emotionally from the tensions of previous weeks. Dorothea's library became her favorite refuge, a circular space in a tower offering panoramic views of snow-covered fields and distant mountains. It was there that Maximilian found her on a clear January afternoon. Gretchen was reading near the window when she heard footsteps on the spiral staircase. When he appeared in the doorway, she dropped her book, her heart racing. Dorothea is very skilled at arranging discreet encounters, he said, quickly crossing the space between them, and I would ride through hell itself to see you. The embrace was intense, desperate, weeks of separation and uncertainty dissolving in the warmth of contact. When they finally separated, both had tears in their eyes. How do you feel? He asked, his hands instinctively finding her belly, which was beginning to show the first delicate signs of pregnancy. Better. Dorothea is maternal in a way I didn't expect. She was always the family rebel, Maximilian said with a smile. My mother never quite knew what to do with her. They settled on the cushioned bench near the window. Gretchen curled against Maximilian's chest while he caressed her hair. Tell me everything, she said. What happened after I left? Maximilian sighed. Drama, negotiations, more drama. Franziska surprised everyone with her maturity. When she learned of the complete situation, she herself suggested an honorable exit. And did it work? It worked better than we expected. She returned to Vienna with an official letter declaring she desired more time for spiritual contemplation before any matrimonial commitment. Her family accepted, especially after my mother offered generous commercial concessions. Gretchen felt a wave of relief. Then we're free? Not exactly. The hesitation in his voice made her raise her eyes to meet his. There are conditions. Our union would be recognized but not publicly celebrated, at least not immediately. What does that mean? It means we could marry, but it would be a private ceremony. You would be my wife before the eyes of God and law, but not before the eyes of the official court. Not yet. The explanation floated between them like a cloud with golden edges, hope mixed with restrictions. And you accept that? She asked. I accept anything that allows us to be together, he responded firmly. Public recognition can come with time, especially if political circumstances change. And if they don't change? Maximilian turned to face her completely. Then we'll live a full and happy life away from spotlights, raising our child with love and true values. There are worse fates, Gretchen. That night during dinner, Dorothea revealed the extent of her own sacrifices for the couple's happiness. I offered this property as a permanent sanctuary, she announced, serving an aromatic stew that smelled of thyme and wine. You can live here as long as you want. The house is large enough for privacy but small enough for intimacy. Dorothea, Maximilian began, we cannot accept. Of course you can, she interrupted firmly. Especially because it's not a completely altruistic offer. I'm old enough to value intelligent company and young enough to appreciate true romance. Having you here would be a gift for me, too. But the risks to you, Gretchen protested. What risks? Dorothea laughed. I'm a childless widow with properties in my own name and independent connections. Elizabeth may not approve my choices, but she can't control me like she does other family members. The offer floated over the table like an unexpected blessing. Gretchen looked at Maximilian, seeing in his eyes the same mixture of gratitude and hope she felt in her own heart. There's a chapel on the property, Dorothea continued casually. Small, private, but properly consecrated. Father Benedict could officiate a ceremony. If you were interested. The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. Gretchen felt tears prick her eyes, not from sadness, but from joy so intense it almost hurt. Would you do that for us? she asked, her voice barely passing a whisper. "My dear," Dorothea said, covering Gretchen's hand with hers, "I'm already doing it." The next morning, a golden carriage waited for Gretchen at the entrance of her residence. The discreet luxury of the interior, embroidered velvet and small silver details, contrasted with the simplicity of her family life. Her father, Heinrich, had observed the preparations with a mixture of pride and concern. As they discreetly planned a ceremony that would unite their destinies irrevocably, none of them could imagine that in distant French cities, events were developing that would change all of Europe's structure, and that perhaps would offer unexpected opportunities for love to triumph over traditional politics. Would Dorothea's refuge truly be safe, or would the storms forming beyond Bavaria's borders still reach them? February snow fell gently over Dorothea's property chapel when the small group gathered for the most important ceremony of their lives. The stone structure, with its simple architecture and colored glass windows that filtered morning light in golden and blue tones, offered a setting of sacred intimacy that no royal cathedral could surpass. Only 5 people were present: Gretchen and Maximilian, naturally, Dorothea as godmother and witness, Father Benedict, who had traveled discreetly from Munich, and, in a surprise that left Gretchen speechless, Duchess Elizabeth herself. Maximilian's mother had arrived the night before without warning and without retinue, wearing simple travel clothes that made her seem more like a rural lady than the matriarch of a royal dynasty. "I cannot officially support this marriage," she had explained to Gretchen in a private conversation before the ceremony, "but I can, as a mother and woman, recognize when my son has found something true and rare, and I can guarantee you have at least one family blessing." Gretchen wore a simple light blue silk dress that Dorothea had worn at her own wedding decades before, carefully adjusted to accommodate the delicate changes in her body. In her hair, a lace veil that had belonged to Maximilian's grandmother, lent by Elizabeth in a gesture that spoke louder than any official proclamation. Maximilian was magnificent in high-quality civilian clothes, dark blue coat, fine wool trousers, and a white silk cravat. Without uniforms or royal insignia, he seemed more authentically noble than he ever had in all the court's pomp. "Are you ready?" asked Father Benedict, his words echoing softly in the silent chapel. When Gretchen and Maximilian took each other's hands before the simple altar, the outside world, with its political complications and social expectations, seemed to disappear completely. "Maximilian," the father said, "do you accept Gretchen as your legitimate wife, to love and protect her, in prosperity and adversity, in health and sickness, as long as you both live?" "I do," Maximilian responded, his voice clear and firm, resonating in the silent chapel. "Gretchen, do you accept Maximilian as your legitimate husband, to love and support him, in prosperity and adversity, in health and sickness, as long as you both live?" "I do," she said, feeling as if the words came not just from her throat, but from every fiber of her being. The rings were simple, polished gold without ornaments, but each engraved inside with the date and intertwined initials. When Maximilian slid the ring onto Gretchen's finger, she felt as if an invisible chain connecting her to her destiny finally completed. "By the power conferred upon me by Holy Church," Father Benedict pronounced solemnly, "I declare you husband and wife. What God has joined, let no man separate." The kiss that followed was tender and promising, charged with all the possibilities the future might hold. In the small celebration that followed in the house's main room, Elizabeth surprised again by presenting an official letter. "This document," she explained, "recognizes the marriage as valid before Church and Bavarian state. It's not a public announcement, but it's legal recognition. Your children will be legitimate, Gretchen, and will have inheritance rights." The gesture's generosity brought tears to Gretchen's eyes. "Your Excellency is very kind." "It's not kindness," Elizabeth corrected. "It's maternal pragmatism. My grandson or granddaughter will be born in uncertain political circumstances. This document guarantees there will always be legal protection, no matter what the future brings." Dorothea, who had been surprisingly quiet during the entire ceremony, finally raised her champagne glass. "To Maximilian and Gretchen," she said, her voice charged with emotion. "May they prove that true love can flourish even in the most unlikely gardens, and may their happiness be a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes forgets the value of authenticity." That night, While Elizabeth returned discreetly to Munich and Dorothea retired to her quarters, Gretchen and Maximilian found themselves finally alone as husband and wife in the suite Dorothea had prepared for them. The room was cozy without being opulent, polished dark wood furniture, Persian rugs in earthy tones, a fireplace where logs crackled cheerfully. More importantly, it was completely theirs, a space where they could simply be themselves without protocols or external expectations. "Mrs. von Wittelsbach," Maximilian said softly, enveloping her in his arms. "That's going to take some time to get used to," she admitted, laughing. "We have a whole lifetime for you to get used to it," he responded, kissing her forehead. "And now that we're officially married, I can say this without reservations. I love you, Gretchen. Not just as a prince who found a suitable companion, but as a man who found the other half of his soul. And I love you," she responded, "not for your title or position, but for the man you chose to be when all masks fell away." They spent the night talking about the future, about the child who would come, about the life they would build together, about how they would navigate between the demands of his position and the desires of their hearts. "There's something I need to tell you," Maximilian said when conversation naturally turned to practical matters. "Letters have arrived from France. The situation there is deteriorating rapidly. What does that mean for us?" "It could mean that the traditional structure of European monarchy is changing," he said thoughtfully. "If that happens, marriages for political convenience might become less important than genuine leadership and real connection with the people." Gretchen considered this. "Are you saying our situation might become advantageous?" "I'm saying your bourgeois origin and our union for true love might prove more politically valuable than any arranged alliance," he confirmed. "But those are speculations. For now, we have a home, we have love, and we have a future to build." As they fell asleep that first night as husband and wife, wrapped in each other's arms and protected by an extraordinary woman's generosity, Gretchen felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. But letters from France continued arriving, bringing increasingly alarming news. And on a certain night, correspondence would arrive that would change everything. A letter from a young and perceptive Austrian princess offering a completely new perspective on Europe's future and their place in it. Would this peace be merely the eye of a greater storm, or had they finally found a safe harbor where love could flourish regardless of the political winds blowing across the continent? Spring arrived early at Dorothea's property that year of 1789, as if nature itself was eager to celebrate new beginnings. The gardens bloomed with an exuberance that surprised even Dorothea, who had known every flower bed and tree on her property for 2 decades. Gretchen, now visibly pregnant at 4 months, spent her mornings walking through the flowering gardens, one hand always resting on her growing belly. Maximilian frequently accompanied her on these morning walks, the two talking about everything and nothing, building the daily intimacy that arranged marriages rarely experienced. "Do you feel different?" he asked on a particularly beautiful April morning, when cherry blossoms created a pink canopy over the small stone path. "Different how?" she responded, stopping to inhale the flower's perfume. "Now that we're officially a family, now that there are no more uncertainties about our status." Gretchen considered the question carefully. "I feel anchored," she said finally, "as if I can finally look toward the future without fear of it being torn away at any moment." It was in this atmosphere of domestic contentment that a letter arrived that would fundamentally change their perspective on their situation. The correspondence arrived on a rainy May afternoon, brought by a discreet courier who disappeared as quickly as he had appeared. It was addressed to Gretchen in elegant and precise handwriting she immediately recognized. Princess Franziska von Habsburg. Gretchen opened the letter with trembling hands, Maximilian reading over her shoulder in the library that had become their favorite refuge. "Dear Gretchen, I hope I may call you so. I hope this letter finds you in good health and happiness. I write from Vienna, where echoes of French events arrive daily, altering our understanding of many things we once considered immutable. First, I must express my sincere happiness for your marriage. Far from feeling offended or rejected, I feel relieved to have escaped a union that, though politically convenient, would have denied all of us the possibility of true love. But I write mainly to share observations that may interest you. Events in France are not isolated aberrations. Throughout Europe, people question structures that seemed eternally fixed. Kings who remain close to their subjects, who demonstrate genuine understanding of common life realities, may find themselves in a much stronger position than those who isolate themselves in obsolete protocols. Your marriage, my dear, may prove not a scandal to be hidden, but an example to be celebrated. A union between nobility and bourgeoisie based on love and mutual respect may be exactly the kind of symbolism the new Europe seeks. Naturally, timing is everything. But I advise you not to hide indefinitely. When the right moment comes, and you'll recognize it when it arrives, be brave enough to emerge as the couple you truly are. With genuine affection and best wishes for your future, Franziska P.S. I heard you're expecting a child. What joy! A new generation born in a new era. The silence following the reading was broken only by rain drumming on windows. Gretchen felt something reorganize in her understanding of herself and her situation. She's right, Maximilian said finally, his voice charged with growing excitement. Times are changing more rapidly than any of us anticipated. But we're still the same, Gretchen protested. I'm still a merchant's daughter. You're still a prince. Those realities haven't changed. No, he agreed, but the value attributed to those realities may be changing radically. That night during dinner, Dorothea confirmed their suspicions with news she had received through her extensive network of correspondence. The letters I received from Paris describe a transformation that goes far beyond political matters, she said, serving an exceptional wine she had saved for special occasions. Nobility titles earned by merit are being valued over inherited titles. Leaders who demonstrate genuine connection with common people are gaining influence over those who cling to ancestral privileges. What are you suggesting? Gretchen asked. That perhaps it's time to consider emerging from your refuge, Dorothea responded carefully. Not immediately, of course, but when your child is born, when you feel ready, perhaps you'll discover the world will receive you very differently than it would have a year ago. The possibility floated over them like a distant aurora, not yet visible but promising to illuminate a new day. 2 weeks later, a second letter arrived that solidified their emerging reflections. This came from Elizabeth, written in handwriting more hurried than usual. My dear ones, events in Munich are evolving rapidly. Groups of merchants and artisans are organizing, not in rebellion, but seeking greater participation in affairs affecting their lives. Paradoxically, they express more loyalty to the crown than many traditional noble families who see changes as threats to be resisted. The Duke has asked about you. Not directly, but his questions suggest he's reconsidering the wisdom of keeping you hidden. A prince married to a respected daughter of the merchant class may be exactly the kind of bridge needed between worlds that seem to be growing apart. Consider this carefully. I'm not suggesting precipitous exposure, but preparation for possibilities that once seemed impossible. With maternal love, Elizabeth. That night, Gretchen and Maximilian walked through the gardens under a starry sky, their hands intertwined, as they contemplated a future that suddenly seemed full of unexpected possibilities. Are you afraid? He asked. I am, she admitted, but I also have hope. And maybe, for the first time, I have the feeling our story can have a happy ending, not despite who we are, but because of who we are. Our child will be born in an era of changes, Maximilian said, putting his hand over her belly. Perhaps he'll be exactly the kind of leader this new world will need. As they walked back to the house, neither knew that in the coming weeks, events in France would accelerate dramatically, creating waves that would reach the tranquil property of Dorothea and offer opportunities that would change their lives forever. Would they be ready to embrace those opportunities when they arrived, or would fear of the unknown keep them in the safety of their idyllic refuge? Summer of 1789 arrived with intense heat and news that made the European political world vibrate, like a string stretched to its maximum. Gretchen, now in the final months of pregnancy, found herself in a wicker chair under the shade of an ancient walnut tree, reading aloud to Maximilian the latest correspondence arriving daily from France. The Bastille fell, she read, her voice charged with incredulity. The people of Paris took the fortress in July. They say it was the beginning of something irreversible. Maximilian, resting on a blanket spread on the grass beside her, closed his eyes for a moment. The Europe we know is ending, isn't it? Or being born, Dorothea corrected, appearing in the garden with a tray of iced lemonade. I receive letters from everywhere. Change isn't limited to France. Everywhere, common people are demanding voice in the affairs governing their lives. It was a particularly hot August afternoon when the first contractions began. Gretchen was in the library, corresponding with Sister Maria from Étal Convent, when familiar but intensified pain shot through her abdomen. "Maximilian," she called calmly, though her heart had begun to race. He appeared instantly, as if he had been waiting for her call. "Is it time?" "I think so." What followed was a carefully choreographed dance they had planned for months. Dorothea had discreetly hired an experienced midwife, Frau Weber, who lived in a nearby village. Maximilian rode to fetch her, while Dorothea helped Gretchen settle in the room they had prepared especially for birth. Labor lasted 18 hours, 18 hours during which the outside world seemed to pause its frantic march toward change. Maximilian remained on the property, pacing corridors like a caged feline, while Dorothea and Frau Weber cared for Gretchen with maternal competence. Finally, when the first ray of September sun filtered through lace curtains, a vigorous cry announced the arrival of new life. "A boy," Frau Weber announced with satisfaction, wrapping the child in a soft embroidered blanket. Strong and healthy. When Maximilian was finally authorized to enter the room, he found Gretchen exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle that cried with impressive determination for someone so new to the world. "Johann," she said softly, looking at the son who moved small fists in the air as if already protesting the world's injustices. "As we agreed." Maximilian knelt beside the bed, his eyes fixed on his son's tiny face. When the baby opened his eyes, blue like his father's, something fundamental reorganized in the prince's heart. "My son," he murmured, his voice broken with emotion. "My legitimate son. Our son," Gretchen corrected softly. "Born free, born of love." Dorothea, who had assisted at the birth with an adoptive grandmother's excitement, brought champagne to celebrate. "To Johann von Wittelsbach," she toasted, "may his life be a bridge between the world that was and the world being born." 3 days after birth, a letter arrived that would fundamentally change their circumstances. It was from Elizabeth, but came accompanied by an official seal that made Maximilian frown. "My dear son and daughter-in-law first, my warmest congratulations on my grandson's birth. May Johann grow strong and wise. I write with news that may surprise you. Your marriage and Johann's existence are no longer secrets. Information leaked through sources we're still investigating, but the reaction has been unexpectedly positive. The people of Munich, far from being scandalized, are celebrating. They see in you a representation of their own values, honest work rewarded, true love triumphing over political convenience, a new generation born without the prejudices of the past. More importantly, the Duke has decided it's time for you to return publicly, not as fugitives seeking forgiveness, but as representatives of a new form of leadership Bavaria will need in the turbulent times approaching. An official carriage will await you next Monday. Come home. Come as the family you are with love and pride, Elizabeth." The silence following the letter's reading was broken by Johann's soft crying, who seemed to protest the sudden tension in the air. "What do you think?" Gretchen asked, gently rocking the baby. "I think," Maximilian said slowly, "our real life is about to begin." "And are you ready?" Maximilian looked at his wife, the woman who had defied all conventions to be with him, and at his son, who represented not only their personal heritage, but perhaps the future of monarchy itself. "I'm ready," he said with growing conviction. "We're a family now. We're stronger together than any of us could be alone." Dorothea, who had heard the conversation in silence, smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. "Will you miss this?" she asked. "Always," Gretchen responded. "But this place gave us something more valuable than refuge. It gave us time to become who we needed to be. And now," Maximilian added, "it's time to show the world who we've become." As they prepared to leave the sanctuary that had protected their nascent love, none of them could completely foresee what role they would play in the transformed Europe awaiting them. But for the first time, they faced the future not as victims of circumstances, but as active architects of their own destiny. The revolution sweeping France was creating waves that would alter all European social structures. And at the center of that transformation, a prince, a merchant's daughter, and their newborn son were about to discover that true love, far from being an obstacle to political leadership, might be exactly the quality the New World would demand from its rulers. December 1789 brought heavy snowfall and even more tempestuous news from France. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had been effectively prisoners of the Parisian people for months, and rumors circulated about possible execution of the French royal family. In Munich, tension was palpable. Other German courts began pressuring Ludwig to abandon his dangerous experiments with popular participation in government. Letters arrived weekly from Vienna, Berlin, and Dresden, warning about the dangers of giving ideas to the common people. But something extraordinary had happened in Bavaria during the months of Gretchen and Maximilian's absence. The Bavarian experiment, as European pamphlets began calling it, had taken on a life of its own. The carriage that brought the family back to Munich traveled through roads where something had fundamentally changed. Villages displayed new prosperity, well-maintained houses, thriving commerce, people who seemed to walk with greater dignity. Where once there might have been suspicious glances toward a royal carriage, now there were smiles and waves. "Look," Gretchen said to Maximilian, Johann sleeping peacefully in her arms while they observed the landscape through the carriage window. "They seem happier." "They are happier," confirmed their escort captain, a young officer who had been assigned to bring them back safely. The new policies, greater merchant participation in decisions, fairer tax distribution, local representation in government, they're working. When they finally entered Munich, the scene waiting for them was unprecedented. Instead of the formal reception typical of royal returns, a spontaneous crowd had gathered. But it wasn't the mob Gretchen might have feared. It was a mixed gathering of artisans, merchants, minor nobles, and common citizens, all apparently eager to see the couple whose story had become symbol of new possibilities. "Prince Maximilian! Princess Gretchen!" the voices called, and there was genuine affection in the shouts, not mere obligation. The palace itself had changed. Gone were some of the more ostentatious displays of wealth. In their place, Gretchen noticed, were artworks and decorations that reflected Bavarian culture more authentically, local crafts elevated to art, portraits of citizens alongside nobles, tapestries telling stories of the people, not just the dynasty. Elizabeth received them in a salon that was elegant, but notably less formal than before. When she embraced Johann, her first time seeing her grandson, tears flowed freely down her cheeks. "Si's beautiful," she murmured, and there was wonder in her voice. "He looks like both of you, Maximilian's eyes but Gretchen's determined chin." "How has everything changed so much?" Gretchen asked, observing the transformations around them. "Your story inspired people," Elizabeth explained. "When news of your marriage leaked instead of scandal, there was celebration. People saw in you the possibility that merit and love could triumph over ancient prejudices. That gave them courage to demand the same in their own lives." Ludwig appeared shortly after, and Gretchen was surprised by the change in him as well. The Duke seemed more relaxed, more confident, as if governing by consensus had relieved him of burdens rather than adding them. "My dear children," he said, embracing them both, "you have no idea what you've started." "Is that good or bad?" Maximilian asked with a smile. "It's transformative," Ludwig responded seriously. "Bavaria is becoming a model for all of Europe. Other states are sending delegations to study our experiment. We're proving that monarchy can evolve without losing its essence." That evening, during dinner with the enlarged family, Elizabeth, Ludwig, Dorothea, who had accompanied them to witness this historic moment, and several key advisors, the true extent of changes was revealed. "Agricultural production is up 30%, reported one advisor. "Commerce thrives under fairer regulations. Most importantly, there's genuine popular support for the crown. Not fear, but affection and respect." "And the opposition?" Gretchen asked. "Weakening," Ludwig admitted. "It's hard to argue against prosperity and stability. Our new form of government is producing results our most optimistic allies didn't expect." Friedrich von Wittelsbach, Gretchen noticed, was conspicuously absent from the celebrations. "Where is Count Friedrich?" she asked Elizabeth quietly. "Visiting relatives in Austria," Elizabeth responded with a slight smile. "He felt the need for extended vacation to reconsider his perspectives." Spring 1790 arrived loaded with possibilities no one would have dared imagine a year before. The Bavarian Revolution, as European pamphlets began calling it, had inspired similar movements in other small German states, creating an informal confederation of territories governed by popular consensus. Gretchen found herself in the palace garden on a golden May morning, watching Johann, now 8 months old, attempting his first crawling movements on soft grass. Beside her, Maximilian read correspondence arriving daily from all over Europe. Letters of support from Hamburg, Frankfurt, and even some Austrian cities, he reported, marveled. It seems our dangerous experiment is spreading faster than our critics can contain it. And the opposition? Diminishing, he admitted. It's hard to argue against prosperity and stability. Our new form of government is producing results even our most optimistic allies didn't expect. It was true. In the 6 months since the confrontation with the Austrian delegation, Bavaria had flourished in unexpected ways. Commerce prospered under fairer regulations. Agriculture benefited from cooperatively planned investments. Most importantly, there was palpable energy in the streets. The feeling that each person had real voice in collective destiny. Johann approves, Gretchen said, laughing when the baby finally managed to crawl 3 steps before sitting triumphantly on the grass. He's growing up in a world I can barely recognize as the same one I was born into, Maximilian observed. A world where his value will be determined by his actions, not his inheritance. A familiar figure appeared in the garden. Sister Maria, now dressed in simple civilian clothes. She had left the convent some months before, inspired by Gretchen and Maximilian's example, to seek a life based on authentic choices instead of imposed expectations. Maria! Gretchen rose to embrace her friend. How are you adapting to secular life? Better than I expected, Maria responded with a radiant smile. The orphanage we're establishing already has 20 children, and I discovered I can serve God as well caring for orphans as praying in cloister. And Herr Weber? Maximilian asked with a mischievous smile. Maria blushed, a response that said everything. Klaus Weber, the widowed carpenter who had become Maria's partner in work with orphans, had also become something much more personal. We'll marry next month, she announced. A simple ceremony, but open to all. As you taught us, love should be. 6 months later, in the same rural chapel where they had married, Gretchen and Maximilian attended a second historic ceremony. Sister Maria and Klaus Weber exchanged vows in a celebration that brought together the entire community, aristocrats and plebeians, Catholics and Protestants, young and old. To Maria and Klaus, Dorothea toasted at the reception that followed, who proved that each generation can choose to redefine what love, family, and community mean. While celebration continued around them, Gretchen and Maximilian found themselves in a moment of silent reflection. Johann, now a year old and walking with hesitant but determined steps, explored the garden under the vigilant supervision of his grandmother, Elizabeth. We did it, Gretchen said softly. Against all odds, we created a space where true love can flourish. We created more than that, Maximilian responded, watching his son chase butterflies with crystalline laughter. We created a future where he can make choices we can't even imagine. And if our experiment fails? She asked, one last shadow of doubt. Then at least we tried, he said, kissing her forehead. And at least our son will grow up knowing his parents fought for a more just world. But when they looked around, at mixed families celebrating together, at children playing without awareness of class differences, at adults cooperatively planning a shared future, they knew their experiment hadn't failed. They had created something new, something lasting, something that would extend far beyond Bavaria's borders. Continuation, the heart of Bavaria. The next morning arrived with letters from all over Europe, letters bringing news that would change the course of their lives once more. Heinrich von Regensburg had ridden from Munich during the night to personally bring the most important news. My daughter, he said, his eyes shining with a mixture of pride and amazement. Official invitations have arrived, not just from German states, but from France itself. Gretchen felt her breath catch. Invitations for what? To participate in the new National Assembly, Heinrich responded. The French revolutionaries have heard about our Bavarian experiment. They want Maximilian and you to go to Paris as representatives of a new form of monarchy, one that governs with the people, not over them. Maximilian approached, Johann in his arms. Are they certain of this? The letters bear official seals, Heinrich confirmed, and there's more. Delegations from all over Europe are requesting audiences. They want to learn how you managed to create stability amid chaos, how you united social classes instead of dividing them. Dorothea, who had been listening from the doorway, entered with a radiant smile. "Isn't it wonderful? Your love not only triumphed over social conventions, it became a model for all Europe." 3 months later, as they packed for the journey to Paris, Gretchen found herself reflecting on the extraordinary path they had traveled. From that snowy day when they saved a child in the market fire to this moment when they prepared to help shape Europe's future. "Are you afraid?" Maximilian asked, watching her carefully fold the blue dress she had worn at their wedding. "I'm terrified," she admitted, "but also excited. For the first time, I feel our love has a purpose that goes beyond ourselves." Johann, now a 15-month-old child full of energy, ran around the room, babbling in his own language while helping pack by playing with trunk straps. "Look at him," Maximilian said tenderly. "He's already ready to conquer the world." "His world will be very different from ours," Gretchen observed. "A world where barriers between social classes are blurred, where merit matters more than birth, where true love doesn't have to hide." Sister Maria, now Mrs. Weber, came to say goodbye, accompanied by her husband Klaus and several of the orphans they had taken in. "Take something of us with you," Maria said, giving Gretchen a small medallion. "So you remember that the love you represent has already changed many lives here at home." The farewell was emotional, but full of hope. Dorothea would accompany them to Paris. "Someone has to make sure you don't forget to eat," she had joked, but everyone knew her real motivation was to witness this historic moment. As the carriage moved away from the property where they had found refuge and built their family, Gretchen felt a mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. In her arms, Johann watched the passing landscape with curious eyes, as if he already understood he was embarking on a great adventure. "What are you thinking about?" Maximilian asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "About that first night in the winter garden," she responded, "when we thought it was our last moment together. We never would have imagined we'd end up here." "True love has a way of creating its own miracles," he said, taking her hand. "And our love did more than save us. It's helping to save Europe." Dorothea, seated facing them, smiled. "You're going to change the world, you know that." "We already changed it," Gretchen corrected softly. "One person at a time, one family at a time, one heart at a time." As the carriage headed toward Paris and toward a future full of possibilities they could barely imagine, Johann clapped cheerfully, as if he were already celebrating the victories to come. Years later, historians would write about the Bavarian Revolution as a crucial moment in the evolution of European monarchy. They would speak of how a prince and a merchant's daughter, united by true love, demonstrated that government by consensus was not only possible, but prosperous. But for those who lived those extraordinary days, the real revolution wasn't political. It was living proof that authentic love, the kind of love that defies conventions, that unites different worlds, that refuses to be contained by others' expectations, can change not only individual lives, but the very course of history. In a small rural chapel in Bavaria, where two brave souls promised each other eternal love, a new understanding was born, that the greatest revolution of all doesn't occur on battlefields or in halls of power, but in human hearts that refuse to accept that true love is impossible. And so Gretchen von Regensburg and Prince Maximilian von Wittelsbach proved that when two people love each other enough to risk everything, they can create not only their own happiness, but a model of hope for future generations. Their son Johann would grow up to become one of Europe's most respected leaders, governing with the same compassionate heart and fierce determination his parents had demonstrated. But his greatest achievement wasn't his policies or reforms. It was growing up knowing, without any doubt, that he was the product of the purest and truest love. And in that, perhaps, lies the most important lesson of this story, that true love is not just a personal destination, but a gift that extends through generations, illuminating the world long after the initial candles have been extinguished.